Welcome back. So let's now take care of our application data and the user interface as well by using a technique called templating. So basically we have this HTML template that will then be filled with the data for each of the laptops. So for example, when it's laptop 4, then our template will get filled with all this data, this image, this price, then this data, and also the description. But if we have image 3, for example, then it is a different price, different image, different data, different name here, and everything changes, but the template is the same, okay? And so what we're going to do now is to take an HTML file that I coded for this page and convert it into a template, which we can then use to replace the data and send that back to the browser, okay? Maybe it sounds complicated, but it's actually quite straightforward, okay? So let's open up the laptop.html. And so this is the HTML code that I was talking about. I also have the CSS code right in the HTML because that's easier, okay? And so down here, that is the HTML that we will now replace with some placeholders basically that we can then replace, okay? So let's create a folder here called templates. And then copy these two into that folder, so that we keep the originals here. What happened here? Copy. Yeah, sure, I wanted to paste. So paste them in there, and here we go. Close all of this. Let's rename this also. And the name doesn't really matter. I'm just going to call it template and then the original name. All right. So starting with template overview, or actually template laptop, let's come down here, and everything that is data we will now replace with a placeholder. So here we have the price, so let's replace that. And what I'm going to do here as a placeholder is like using a couple of symbols so that we don't accidentally replace something that we actually want to keep. So if we do like this, well, then we can be sure that nowhere else on the page, I actually want this, okay? So now we know that nowhere else on the page will probably be something like this, right? So this is our placeholder. If we just call this price, just like this, maybe there might be some other string exactly like this, and then we would replace something that we actually want to keep. And so with this kind of unique looking text here, that is not going to happen. And so we're always going to use this format here, okay? Then here we want the image. We actually copied this one here, that's easier. Here the slash, and I'm going to explain why here in a second, or actually a bit later in the video, because the image will be something that we will have to fix later, okay? As the alt text here, we want the product name, okay? And the product name will be this here, right? So again, later we are going to replace all of this by the data that's going to come from this JSON. So the price, the product name, then image, CPU, RAM, storage, screen, and description, okay? So the product name here, again, the product name. Then here we have the screen. Then we have the CPU. We have storage. And finally, we have RAM. Then this here is the description. And then finally, again, the price. Okay. Then here I have some emojis, as you're probably noticing. And maybe on your computer they are not working. Maybe you don't have the latest operating system version. And you can just use something else, so you can get rid of the emojis altogether if you don't like them, okay? But anyway, our template here should now be done. And we are now ready to basically load this HTML file, replace all of these placeholders by the real text, and then send that HTML to the browser each time that we request a certain laptop. Okay, makes sense? So let's do that. And it's right here in the laptop route, right? So fs read file again, and this time we're not going to use the sync version. Okay, so many times in Node there are synchronous and asynchronous versions of the same functions. Now I'm not going to go into real deep details here, but the synchronous version is always blocking. So basically it makes the entire code stop for the time that the function is doing its work, and that is going to block the entire thread for all the users that are accessing your code. Because Node.js runs in something called a single thread. And so there's only one thread in the computer that runs your application, no matter if you have 10 users or 1,000,000 users accessing your app at the same time, okay? So if you block the single thread with a synchronous function that takes up a lot of time, all the other users will have to wait until that function finishes its work. And so usually we always try to use the asynchronous versions, okay? Because then they do the work in the background, and as soon as they're finished, they simply run the callback that we pass into the asynchronous function, okay? And so that's what we're going to do here. So we have the asynchronous file read, and then we need to pass in the file name of the template that we just created. Again, we have to use the dir name variable, and then templates, and template laptop.html. Then the character encoding again, so UTF-8. And now this time, again, we have the callback function in here. And that callback function gets access to at least two parameters, which are error and the red data. Okay, so this time we're not going to save anything to any variable like we did up here in this synchronous file read, but instead we're going to wait until Node finishes reading our file and then calls our callback and passes the data into that callback as the data parameter. So now in here, in this callback, we will have access to that data using this data parameter. Okay, now up here we did the synchronous file read here, and I just want to mention this because you might be wondering why the hell we used the synchronous version up here. And we did so because here it is no problem, because this only happens once you start your app, and not while maybe millions or at least thousands of users might be using your app at the same time, okay? Because remember, each time that someone accesses your code, this is the callback function that is executed. Okay, and so this is where you don't want to block the main thread. But here is no problem because, again, it runs only once when you start up your application. Anyway, what we have here now is basically this HTML read into this data variable, right? So all of this here is now as a string in that data variable. So now all we have to do is to replace, again, these placeholders, as I mentioned before. Okay, and so that's very easy. So let's do that. So let's create a variable here called output, and it's actually a let because we're going to change this basically for each of the placeholders. Okay, so this will be data.replace. It's a very simple string method, and so we say, and let's start here by the product name. And then replace it with the actual data. And what is the actual data? Well, it is the laptop data, right? So that is our array here that we read from the data.json file, and then at the position of the ID. So ID, which is, remember, the ID that we read from our URL. Okay, and so if we read the number 3, well, then we're going to access the laptop data at position number 3. Okay, so we have that laptop now. Imagine that it's number 3, so 0, 1, 2, 3, and what we want is the product name. Okay, dot product name, and let's actually create this variable here outside. So just like this. So take it from here, and so we only have to read it once. And so it's now laptop.productName. Okay, and now all we have to do is to do the same for all the others. Now keep in mind that this replace method here will actually return a new string. All right, so output is now data with the product name replaced. What this means is that when we next want to replace the next placeholder, let's say image, we have to do that in the output from before. Okay, Otherwise, we're going to do it in the original data variable where the product name was not yet changed. Okay, so basically this is like a chain. So first we replace the product name, then in that variable we replace the image, and then the price, the screen, and so on and so forth. Okay. And now we can just duplicate this here a couple of times. So we have image, then we have price, then we have the screen, we have CPU, we have storage, we have the RAM, and then finally we're gonna have the description. And I guess that's all for now. All right, now there's just one small issue here, which is that replace only replaces the first occurrence of each of the labels, so of the strings that we're searching for. Now we have this price here, I remember, twice. And so we have to change that. And the way we do it is to actually use something called a regular expression. Okay? And I'm not going to go deep into that here again. You can just always Google a regular expression when you need it. Okay? Now all I'm going to do here is to actually replace these quotes here with a slash. Okay? Because a regular expression always starts and ends with a dash. And then the same here. So all of these here need to go now. And then slash and G. Okay, so again, regular expressions is something that you can just Google. This is not a part of Node.js, it is just a regular JavaScript. All right, and if this here seems a lot of work to you, then of course, as I mentioned before, there are tools in Node.js, and mainly I'm talking about something called Express, which is a framework for Node, which takes some of the pain away from this. So we can use something called template engines, which will make it a lot easier to do this, what we're now doing manually. But again, I think it's a great exercise to learn how things actually work and how you can do everything on your own also, even without using any framework, all right? So we should now have our final HTML in this output variable, and then all we have to do is to actually send this to the browser. So send the response back. So we use the res variable again, so the res object, and then end and output. All right, let's check that out. We have number 4 and we have some kind of error here. So let's check out what's happening. And it says here that output has already been declared. And of course, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. Let's just get rid of all of them. So we only need to declare it, of course, once, and then we're good to go. Try that again, and bam, here we go. So we have our real HTML page here with all the data that is coming from the Samsung Notebook 9. So from number 4. So we have the RAM, storage, screen, and you will see everything is the same as we have in our data JSON. So that's amazing. That's really great. Number 1 is the Apple MacBook, and now we have 1 terabyte, a 15-inch Retina display, and a 6-core Intel i9. And of course, this huge price. Now, one thing that's missing here is the image, and we're going to fix that a bit later, because that's something a bit particular. And for now, I just want to continue with this templating now for the other part, so for the product. So we have the laptop page now working. Let's go ahead and do the same for the product overview. So basically, this part here. Okay, now this will be a bit more difficult because we will basically have a loop which will loop over all of our products, and then for each of them create this HTML for this card here. So if we have only one product, it will only create, of course, one of these product cards. If we have 10, then we want 10 of these product cards. And so we have to do that with a kind of loop. So let's again start by creating the template. Okay, so we have the template overview. And so let's go ahead and do the same as we did before down here in the HTML. All right. And actually, I think I forgot something here because the product name should also be in the title. So right here as well. Okay, so now if we change, then it also says Dell XPS 13 in the title and also down here. Okay, so that part we didn't have before. Anyway, going back to the template overview, we will now actually have to split it in two. And that's because of what I explained to you a moment ago, which is that we have to create these cards here. All right, so only this part, we have to create this one here in a loop. And we have to create as many as we need according to the number of laptops in our data. And so we need one template for everything that's outside, so that's not the card, so that we have basically that container where we can then put the cards into. Okay, does that make sense? So we'll actually go ahead and cut this here, create a new template, template card.html, and then paste it here. And what we want here in this place is all the cards. So we will create a string basically with all of the HTML for all the cards, and then replace this string with that code which contains the cards. Okay? And so in here we're actually done. So all we have to replace really is this part. Right? Up here there's nothing really. And then all the data is actually here. So again, we have the image. Let me go ahead and copy this pattern here. Then in the alt, we will have the product name again. Then here the same. Here it's the screen. The CPU, and finally the price. So this one here has a bit less data. Now actually we also need something else, and that is the href for this link. So we want to go to laptop, and then remember our query string. So ID equals, and then the ID, right? So let me show that to you in the original. So in here, as you can see down there in the corner, right, we will have laptop and then the query ID of ID equals 0, because that will then lead us to the page, as you see then the ID 0, which will then load the data according to the ID, such as we did in the previous step. Okay, and so now in the overview, we will actually have to construct this ID so that it will then take us to the correct laptop that we want to display. Okay, makes sense? So again, the path is laptop, and then the ID equals the ID that we're then going to replace. All right, and so that's actually it already, I believe. And so let's go back and do that here in the route for the product, so the product overview. So don't need that. And now we could go ahead and copy a bunch of this code here, but then we would have duplicate code, and that's not ideal. So instead, let's simply create a function for that, which we can then reuse. So that's always the better thing to do, not only in JavaScript, but in programming in general. Right, so let's create function replace template. And so what we need in here is the original HTML, and we need, of course, the laptop. Okay, and so now what I'm going to do is to cut all of this and paste it down here. Okay, just format this selection, and all right. Just one minor change that we have to do here, because this is no longer called data now, it is the original HTML, which is coming from this parameter, right? Then in the end, all we have to do is to return the output. Okay, and finally, we also need to replace the ID. Okay, so that's for this part here. This part we didn't yet have here in the code, and so I'm adding that to the replace template function now. So let's use replace template first here in this place, which we already had working. So const output will be replace template, and here we passed in the data and the laptop. All right, and just to see if this actually works, let's just reload this. And indeed it does. So everything works the same. And so we simply exported this functionality into its own function so that we can now do the same with the product overview. Okay, so where do we have that part? Ah, yeah, it's right here. Let's actually add some comments here to make this a bit more legible. So product overview or products. Then the laptop detail, and then URL not found. All right, so that always makes it a little bit easier to understand. So again, we need to do this in two phases, basically, as I explained before. So we first need to basically load all the HTML, which is not in the cart. So basically just everything here around. So the title basically, and then this background. Okay, and so that is just this HTML that we have down here. So just this, and we will then go ahead and replace the cards with the HTML generated using this template. Okay, so again, we need to do this in two steps because we want to have a dynamic number of laptops. So I'm just going to go ahead and grab this code here because it's quite similar and there's no need to rewrite all of it. So it's template overview now. And now this part is what we don't need. And now just to check, let's actually simply render what we already have. Okay, and so instead of render output, it's now render the data. So this parameter here. Okay, so let's try that out. So products is our route, and here we go. So we have the title, and then we have this string here that we now in the next step need to replace with our cards. So I can actually go ahead and copy this again and then have it in here. Okay, and so this callback function here basically, so this new one here needs to be inside the first one because we only want to read the card template as soon as the overview template has been read. Okay, so basically to create a sequence here. All right, so this is now template cards or card. This is no longer needed because we're not going to send the data just here without the cards in there. And so let's now loop through all of our different laptops and create the template for each of them. All right, and that should be fairly easy as well. So laptop data, remember that is the array where all of our laptops are stored, so all the objects for each of the laptops. And so we do a simple map. And remember that map is an array method which loops through the array, and in each iteration it saves the result of the callback function into a new array. Okay, and so we need to actually save this here to a new variable. Output, all right. So we've been calling this always output, and so this one is the cards output, all right? So we want to loop through the laptop data, and for each element, what we're going to do is to use our function. So our replace template function that we used before, and so now it's really handy that we did this function, all right? Because all we need to do now is to pass in the cards HTML, so data, and then the laptop, which in this case is the current element called AL, right? So remember, we need to pass in the original HTML and the laptop. And in this case, the original HTML is this data that we read for the card, and the element is the current element of this iteration through the laptop data array. All right, so let's just log this to the console here, just so that it makes 100% sense to you. I'm not sure it does at this point. And so let's just reload. This looks a bit weird, but don't worry. Right now, I'm only interested in the output here. And so you see that we have now the HTML for all these cards. So it's an array actually, so an array of all these strings. So we have the card, then here we have the next element, so the next element in the array, a new card, and so we will have 5 cards for all the 5 laptops. Okay, makes sense? Now we want this actually in a string, and so all we have to do is to say join, and again we did this before, so this is nothing new really. So we join this with an empty string, and if I reload this now, you will see that the output is simply a huge string with all of this HTML. So perfect. So what is the next step that we need to do? Well, all we have to do now is to replace that cards placeholder, so this one here, with this HTML that we just generated. Okay, so this data here. And so let's actually give it a name here. Let output equal the data. All right. And so now all we have to do is to change that output so that original data here, so the overview output, and let's actually call it overview output to make it a little bit less confusing, I guess. So the overview output will be overview output dot replace, and so the string is this one, and now we don't have to worry about any regular expressions because there's only going to be one of this. So we want to replace this placeholder by the cards or with the cards output. And now all we need to do is to render that overview output. And that should be it. Okay, let's try it out. And bam, here we go. Amazing, right? All that's really missing is the image again, but again, I'm going to fix that in a minute. But for now, just see how it actually dynamically on the fly generated this page based on our data. And if I go ahead and remove one of them, of course, let's say I remove this Dell product here. Just get rid of it. If I now reload, then it's of course gone, and now we only have these 4 left. So really, it does it automatically, dynamically, and on the fly. So that is the power of Node.js and JavaScript on the server. As you see, you can really recycle 90% of what you already know of JavaScript and take it to the server to build these back-end applications without any problem. So now it's back, and it's back here as well. Okay, and with everything now working, the last thing that we have to fix is these images not working. So let's actually take a look at them, inspect them, and try to figure out what is not working here. So for all of this, we have this error message. The server responded with a status of 404 not found. So why does this actually happen? Well, it does happen because Node.js doesn't serve any files by default. Every URL is always like a route. And so, for example, if we have this image here, for Node.js, this is just a simple request. Okay, so let's try to figure out what happens if we were to simply put it in here, like this, then we will get the URL was not found on the server. All right, maybe you're thinking that's because it is in the image folder in data. All right, so let's try that out. Because you might think that this part here is like the home folder, and then we need to simply type data/image, and that's it. But that is not how it works actually. All right, because on the Node.js server, this concept of folders and files does not really exist. So everything is like a request. And if we request this image here, well, then we need to kind of respond to that request as well. But right now we only request to the products route and to the laptop route, right? And so we now need basically a route for images as well, so that we can then serve these images on these requests. Okay, and to illustrate this even more, let's go ahead and log this path name here. Okay, and so now you will see that there is not just one request, right? So there's not just a request for these products, but also for style.css and for these 5 images. Okay, so we loaded that page, but that is not the only request. All of the resources that are on the page are also requests, and we need to respond to them if we want to display something based on them, right? So in this case, these images. We also have this style here, but let me just get rid of that. It's probably here in one of these templates. Yeah, right here. That is actually the reason why I did the style inline. So I put it, all the styles right in the HTML files so that we don't have to deal with CSS as well, because then we would have to need yet another route, and that's not really practical. All right. So again, with these frameworks like Express.js, this is a lot easier. You don't have to really do this manually. But once again, I like to really understand how and why things work the way they do. And I think it's also very beneficial for you as well. Okay, so let's now try to do a route for images in general. Of course, we're not going to do a route for each of them individually, right? We're going to have a general route that works for all of the images. So what we want here is another route. So images, else if. And now what we need here is basically a true/false value indicating if the resource that we're requesting is an image. Okay, and again, if you need something like this, you can always Google like regular expression to find image extension. Okay, so basically that's what I did for this, because it's really difficult and time intensive to really learn how regular expression works. All right, I find it easier to just Google it. Okay, so we always start the regular expression with slash and end it with slash, and then in there, there's some kind of magic happening. And in this case, it works just like this. So basically, we test if there is an extension, which is the dot. So if there is a dot JPEG, or maybe a JPEG written with E, because sometimes you see that, or a PNG, because we actually have a PNG, this one here. And let's say we might have a GIF or a GIF, I don't know. And so let's add that here as well. Then we need this $sign here for some reason /I. All right. And so this is our regular expression. And we will now test if our path name contains basically this regular expression. So we say .test, which is a method that is available on all regular expressions in JavaScript. And then our path name. This one I don't need. And okay. So this here is our regular expression again, and we will now test if our path name, which is, for example, this one here, this one or this one, we will test if it contains .jpeg or .jpeg or .png or .gif. All right, and if it does, well, then we're going to read that image and serve it, or basically send it back as the response. Okay, so let's just do that. So read file. Then again, we need the dir name. And now where is this image? So imagine that we have a MacBook Pro 15.jpg as the request. So what we need then is to go into our folder /data/image and then our path name. Make sense? Because that is the name of the image that we're actually trying to read. Okay? Now this time we're not going to do the character encoding because this is not text, it's just an image. Okay, and so now all we have to do is to pass in the callback function, which will be called as soon as we're done reading the image. And again, it's important that this happens asynchronously, and so that's why we're using the read file and not read file async. All right, now as soon as we're done reading that data, all we have to do is to really send the head as always. And this type, let's just do image and then JPEG. Okay, so that's the content type. There are many, and one of them is image /JPEG. So the type of data and then the file extension actually. All right, and then as always res and then end and the data. Okay, now in a real world application, we should also have some error handling in place. And that's why we always have access to this error here as well. So imagine that the image that we're trying to read is not really there. Well, then we would have an error and we could handle that error. But here in this case, we're just going to assume that everything works just fine. All right. Okay, let's now test this. Reload. And bam! Our images are now there. Still one error. Don't know what that is. It's just a CSS for some reason. Take a look. Maybe it is in here as well. No, it's not. The overview also shouldn't have it anymore. Okay. It's here. Can now close all these templates. Don't need them anymore. Reload. And yeah, so now we have no error and we have our images here as well. So again, each of these images is a separate request. And we're handling that request, each of the requests actually, here in this route. So this route handles images with the JPEG, PNG, or GIF format. So as soon as we have one of these extensions in our URL, well, we will read the image from the file system and send it as a response to the browser. And so then, like this, the browser is able to, of course, display them on a page. And it's going to work, hopefully, on these as well. And it does. So now we have the images here, just like in our original store, which we can now close. And let's also actually try it like here. And indeed, our image is also now here. So we can do this simple request here, and our image is going to show up just like this. All right. Well, what's going on here? Not really sure. It's not called, it's really called products. And back. Okay, there's still an error in that code. So in the HTML. So let's open up that laptop, and here should be a link. Yeah, and it sends back to overview.html, and that's of course not correct. What we want is to send it back to product, right? So reload this here, and now, as you can see down there here, it will send us back to product, and here we go. So the Samsung, and here we see the Samsung. And yeah, it now works. So the project is really finished now. Awesome, that's really, really cool. And of course, we only barely scratched the surface here of Node.js, all right? So this is really just the absolute fundamentals of what you can do with it. But I think it was still very exciting, and I hope you found it useful, and hopefully you're gonna want to learn more after this. And if you do feel that Node.js is something you like or something you might find useful in the future, well, let me tell you that I will actually be working on a brand new Node.js course over the next couple of months. All right, so that course will have a ton more explanations than just this small crash course. It will have a lot of theory lectures so that you really understand how Node.js works behind the scenes, and of course a huge real-world project where you're going to learn everything about Node.js, Express, which is a framework that I just talked about, and also use MongoDB as a real database instead of just storing data in text files. So of course, usually the data comes from databases, not just text files like we did here. Okay, so that course will be available sometime in first half of 2019, hopefully. All right, so I hope you can wait for that. And in the meantime, just keep coding, keep building great projects, and keep learning every day. All right. So I hope to see you soon in some of my next videos or courses. And until then, have a good time.